Hi guys, this is Pranav here from Prepco and welcome to the third lecture of our legal reasoning series. In today's lecture, we will be covering the law of contracts. I will be giving you a basic overview of the main principles which are involved in the law of contracts, and in the end, as usual, we will be solving an illustration of the standard question based on law of contracts. Uh, if you have not checked out our earlier videos, the link for the same will be in the description given below. So let's jump right in. So firstly, what is the meaning of contract? What is a contract? Now, a contract is a legally binding agreement which defines the rights and obligations between the parties who are the parties to the contract. Now, it is important to know that every contract is an agreement, but every agreement is not a contract. Now, I'll give you an example of this. So, if for example, like in earlier days, there is an agreement between my parents and someone else's parents to marry off me with their daughter in the future, okay. Now, this agreement is not legally enforceable, so this cannot be termed as a contract. Now, a contract would be something very simple. For example, I am here teaching you legal reasoning. So, I have a contract with Prepco which says that I will be teaching X number of lectures for X amount of money. Now, that is what is a legally binding agreement, because all the essentials of that agreement are met, all the essentials of a contract are met. So here we see the difference between a contract and an agreement. Only when an agreement is legally enforceable, for example the Prepco example that I gave you, only then will that agreement be termed as a contract, and it is defining the rights and obligations. So if I continue with the example of Prepco, I have an obligation to record X number of lectures, and my right is something like I will get X amount of money. The consideration is basically my right, the compensation I'm getting, and the obligation is me recording these X number of lectures. Okay. So, what are the essentials of a contract? So, as you know, contract is governed by the Contract Act of 1872. Now, under that, there are certain essentials of a contract. That is, if all these conditions are met, will an agreement become a legally binding agreement to be termed as a contract. Now, the first thing is there should be an offer from either party. I will tell you what offer means later on. I'll just run you through the main essentials, and then I'll explain each and every essential of the contract. Okay. So, the first is there should be an offer from either party. The second essential is that the other party to which the offer is made has to accept that exact offer. Now, the third essential is that the contract should be between two or more parties who are competent to contract. The fourth essential is that the contract should be entered into with the free consent of all the parties. Fifth is that the contract should be for a lawful consideration, and lastly, the contract should have a lawful object. Okay. So these are the 6 essentials. If all of these are met, then you have a valid and binding contract on your hands. Okay. So now I'll explain each and every one of these essentials. So first, what is an offer? Now, an offer is the final expression of willingness of one party to be bound by the offer. So, if I say for example that I am interested in taking up this job at Prepco for X amount of money, that is my offer. Now, if Prepco accepts that offer, saying that okay, your offer is acceptable, you have quoted X amount of money for this X amount of services, we are agreeable to that. So I've made the offer, and the other party, that is Prepco, has accepted that offer. So that is my final expression of willingness. That is, I am willing to do X amount of work for X amount of money. Correct? But where a party only proposes certain terms on which he is willing to negotiate, it is known as an invitation to offer. Okay, so I'll give you an example. So if A telegraphed to B saying that, will you sell us a bumper hall pen? Okay, will you sell us a certain pen? And he asked them to telegraph the lowest price. Now B has replied to A saying that the lowest price for the pen is 900 rupees or $900. Now this is only an invitation to offer. He's saying he hasn't said that I'm ready to sell it to you for 900 rupees. A asked him what is the lowest price for the pen, and B is just replying to that. So he's not making an offer here. There is no final expression of willingness on part of B to sell the pen for only 900 rupees. So now when A sent another telegram saying that I'm ready to buy the pen for $900. So this is not a valid acceptance because there was no offer in the first place. The quote for 900 was only an invitation to offer on the part of B. So this is an example of an invitation to offer, and the first example which I gave you with regard to Prepco was the normal example of a proper offer. Okay. So let's go on to what is acceptance. Now acceptance should be absolute and unqualified. If you accept the offer made with certain conditions, then that is a counter offer. So for example, if I further the Prepco example, I said I will record 6 lectures for you for legal reasoning for X amount of money. Now if Prepco, instead of accepting this offer as it is, had come to me with another proposal saying that no, 6 lectures is not acceptable, we want you to record 8 lectures and for this amount of money, not the X amount of money that you quoted, but for Y amount of money. Now what they are saying is that is a counter offer. So now they have made a new offer and it is up to me to either accept that offer or to propose another offer to them. Okay, so this is what is meant by a counter offer, and acceptance is only absolute and unqualified. So if I accepted their counter offer for recording 8 lectures for Y amount of money, that would be acceptance on my part. So now let's move on to what is a consideration. Now consideration is the compensation given by one party to the other, and it is the price of the promise. So the Prepco example only let's take. When I said that I'll record 6 lectures to you for X amount of money, that X amount of money is the compensation I'm getting for doing my work. So that is what is termed as consideration. Another simple example is if I agree to sell my house to you for 1 crore rupees. Now 1 crore rupees is the consideration amount. It is the compensation I am getting for selling my house to you. Okay, so this is basically what consideration means. Now the consideration has to be lawful consideration. Okay, so I'll give you an example of unlawful consideration. So if I said I will sell my house to you only if you marry your daughter to me, so here we have something which is an unlawful consideration. You can't make like promise to marry off your daughter without her consent to me just because I'm selling you my house. So the consideration behind the contract is something which is unlawful. So here the contract would not be a valid one. Now the parties to the contract should be competent to contract. Now the Contract Act has a proper list of parties who are not competent to contract. Okay, some illustrations are minor persons. So for example, for a person to contract, he must be 18 years of age. So anyone who's below 18 is considered a minor, and if a person below 18 has entered into a contract with me, that contract becomes void, because he is not authorized, he is not a party which is authorized to enter into the contract. He is not a person who is competent to contract. Another example is persons of unsound mind. So if you are a declared person of unsound mind, you have some mental illness, then again you are not a person who is competent to contract. Any agreement entered into you will not stand. The next essential of contracts is that the contract should be entered into with free consent. That is, the contract has to be entered into with the free will of all the parties to the contract. So if it is between me and Prepco, both of us should have entered into this contract for me to teach you legal reasoning with free consent of both parties. Now consent cannot be affected by either coercion. So coercion is basically, if Prepco had put a gun to my head and said, sign this contract, you are going to teach legal reasoning for us. So this is an example of coercion. Prepco is forcing me to give consent to teach legal reasoning. So this is what is coercion. Now undue influence is a little different. Now undue influence is derived from some relationship. Okay, so a relationship where one person has some overriding influence on the other person. The prime example is a boss putting pressure on the employee. So as you know, it's very hard to you are bound to follow what the boss says usually. So your boss has an undue influence over you. Now if he tells you that you enter into this contract or I'll do something, or you won't get, or indirectly he hints that you won't get a promotion if you don't sign some agreement with him. Now that is what is called as undue influence. The difference between undue influence and coercion, the main one, is that coercion, there is no need for an underlying relationship between the parties, but for undue influence there should be a relationship between the parties which allows one of the parties to put this undue influence on the other party. Okay. The third type of thing that consent can be affected by is fraud. Now fraud means an active concealment of a fact. So it will be something that is cheating the other person. So let's give an example. I have hired a real estate agent to show me some flats. Okay. Now the real estate agent knows the actual square foot of the the square feet that the flat is of. So he knows that the flat is only of 1500 square feet, but he tells me with this knowledge that the flat is of 3000 square feet. Based on this, I entered into that agreement saying that it's 3000 square feet, he's selling it to me for 1 crore rupees, this is a very good deal, I'm taking it. Now this is fraud, because the real estate agent, actively knowing that the flat is of 1500, he told me that it is of 3000 square feet. Okay, so this is what is fraud. Now misrepresentation is a little different. Now misrepresentation is not active concealment of the fact, but without intention of to deceive the other party. If I say something which I thought was correct. So for example, if the real estate agent did not do his job, he did not check the actual square feet that the flat is, he had no idea how big the flat is. He normally believed that it was 3000 only. So he's telling me it is 3000 square feet, but in actual reality the flat was 1500 square feet. Now because the real estate agent did not actually know that the flat in reality was only 1500 square feet, this case will be of misrepresentation and not of fraud, because the real estate agent is not actively concealing this fact. that is that he's not actively concealing the fact that the flat is only of 1500 square feet. Now the last type of mistake of consent is like actual mistake. Now mistake is an erroneous belief on the fact of the contract. So I'll give you an example. Now if the contract said that I will supply 20 plates to you for X amount of money, I thought that plates meant paper plates. You, on the other hand, were under the belief that the plates are ceramic plates. Now, this is a mistake of fact. Both the parties were actually mistaken and as of what type of plates each of the other party was referring to. So, this is an example of mistake. So, if either of these things are met, either coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, or mistake is there in the contract, then that will mean that the contract was not entered into with the free consent of the parties. Now the next essential of the contract is that the contract should be entered into with a lawful object, which basically means that the contract should be for a lawful purpose. Now if the example of me teaching you my contract with Prepco for teaching this legal reasoning series, now that is for a lawful purpose. There is no law which bars me from becoming a teacher to you. However, if I agree to sell goods to Prepco with the intention that Prepco will smuggle the goods outside the country, now the object or the purpose of the contract is to eventually smuggle the goods outside the country. So here this is something which is not lawful, and because it is not lawful, the contract is will not stand. Now after we see the essentials of the contract, there is one important concept, that is void and voidable contracts. Now some contracts are void ab initio, which means that they are not enforceable in any case. Void ab initio means that from the time the contract was signed, it had no value, it had no it had no enforceability. So an example of this is even the smuggling example we took, that is also something that is void ab initio. Another example is an agreement to sell your child. So this is also it is barred by law. So the contract has no enforceable value. You cannot go if I agree to sell my child to you and tomorrow I do not sell my child to you, the other party cannot go to court and say that, look, we had an agreement, he was going to sell his child to me, now he is saying that he won't do so, please enforce this. The court will say that this contract was void from the start, we cannot enforce this. So usually when the parties to the contract are not competent to contract, so if I had entered into an agreement with a minor, so that contract would be something that is void ab initio. Or if the agreement was against law or public policy, even then it would be void ab initio. Example, selling my child, or the smuggling example. Okay, so both these circumstances, the contract is something that is void ab initio. It has no enforceability value. In no circumstance can this contract be enforced. Now we come to voidable contracts. Now, unlike a void contract, voidable contract is a valid contract which can be either affirmed or rejected at the option of one of the parties. So at most one party to the contract is bound by it, and the other party can reject the contract or he can accept the contract. If the other party chooses to reject the contract, then again this contract becomes void. So if the contract, for example, was not entered into with free consent, so if we take the coercion example, if Prepco had put the gun to my head and asked me to sign this contract for me to teach you legal reasoning, Now when I thought that okay, it's not such a bad deal, I'm actually getting money. Okay, so the this contract, when I was coerced to do this, this contract was the Prepco was already bound by it. Even though they coerced me, they are bound by the contract, and I have the option to either reject this contract or accept this contract. Now if I reject it and say that you coerced me to do this, now I no longer want to, then this contract becomes void. But if I say that no, this is a good deal actually, even though they put a gun to my head and made me sign the contract, I am liking this work, and if I continue doing this, I finish the X lectures, and then if they say that no, now we don't want to give you money, then of course I can go to court and say that look, they coerced me to into this contract. I did the work. Now they're not giving the money. I had accepted the contract. Thus, the contract becomes enforceable. So this is an example of voidable contracts. Now another important concept of contract law is what happens if the contract, there is an impossibility of performance or frustration of performance. So in such a circumstances, the contract becomes void. So basically, when a subsequent event renders the performance of the contract impossible, then the contract itself becomes void. So for example, if I had entered into an agreement to sell you my house for 1 crore rupees, but before we could execute this agreement, there was an earthquake in which my house was destroyed. Now because the house itself is destroyed, how can we perform the contract? So in this circumstance, the contract would become void. No, you cannot ask me to enforce it, and I cannot claim 1 crore rupees from it. So normally in a lot of contracts, there is something which is called as a force majeure clause. So force majeure clauses differ from contract to contract, and they usually cover these circumstances. They say that in case there is any new law which comes, or any act of God due to which the contract cannot be performed, then neither party will be held liable, etc., etc. So this is what it means by impossibility of performance or frustration of the contracts. Now next thing that we have to see is what are the damages in case of contract. So in case if you had seen the second lecture, which was on law of torts, there the damages for torts was of unliquidated damages. However, damages in contract are usually liquidated, meaning that they are compensatory in nature and not penal. So in contract, because the parties are known to each other and the consideration amount is fixed, so usually the monetary loss cost to one of the parties due to the action of the other party can also be easily quantified. So for example, if I had entered into the contract to sell my house to you for 1 crore rupees, I hand over the title documents of the house, but you have not given me the consideration amount, that is 1 crore rupees you don't pay me. Now if I go to a court of law for enforcing this contract and or claiming damages for this contract, then the damage is obviously going to be the consideration amount, the 1 crore rupees plus some interest if there is a delay in payment. So this is what it means, and the contract is the damage is compensatory in nature. So I am going to be compensated for the loss caused to me by selling my house, by giving you my house without you having given me the consideration amount. So this is what it means by liquidated damages. So let's go to an illustration. So again, this question was asked in the CLAT 2020 paper. So just a breakaway, in case you have any doubts, or if I was not able to explain any principle satisfactory, So please feel free to leave any of your questions or doubts in the comment section below, and we will do our best to resolve each and every query. So moving on to the illustration. So the passage reads as, the COVID-19 pandemic has taken the entire world hostage in less than 4 months, and the global economy has been hit the hardest, with governments across the globe implementing stringent policies including lockdown to control the coronavirus outbreak. The pandemic today presents unprecedented challenges and impediments to businesses in conducting their normal operations. The lockdown across the world has caused delays in the performance of contracts and transactions. Now, the question that arises is whether the current situation can enable parties to a contract to alter their obligations with non-compliance of terms, neither being regarded as a default committed by any party nor a breach of contract. Now, there are certain well accepted practices for dealing with such extraordinary situations in commercial transactions by the inclusion of force majeure and material adverse effect clauses. Determination of the types of circumstances so covered by the force majeure clause contained in contract is essential. Provisions of force majeure often cover natural disasters like hurricanes, floods, and earthquakes as acts of God. Other covered events may include war, terrorism, civil disorder, fire, disease, medical epidemics, or by reasons of applicable laws or regulations. Broadly, the courts have interpreted the term force majeure as an event that can neither be anticipated nor controlled by either of the contracting parties. A force majeure clause applies in the context of ongoing contractual arrangements, whereas an MAE or material adverse change clause applies to the allocation of risk in transactions before their closure or completion. Pandemic and related consequences such as government action is a type of event covered by force majeure clause. However, its impact on the affected party's ability to perform its contractual obligations may vary depending upon the contractual terms. It is common for force majeure clauses to specify the impact that the event or circumstances in question must have in order for the clause to be triggered. References may be made, for example, to the event or circumstances having prevented, hindered, or delayed performance. Now, these terms may require different levels of impact on performance before a party can claim recourse to these clauses. In other words, the force majeure and MAC clauses act as an exception to what would otherwise be termed as a breach of contract. Certain contracts may state that if the force majeure clause is applied, the contract may automatically be terminated. On the other hand, some contracts may state that duty to fulfill the contractual obligations may be suspended for a certain period of time, and if such force majeure event is not curbed or treated even after such time, then eventually the contract may be terminated. Though there cannot be a one-size-fits-all solution to this question, and it depends upon how the force majeure clause is worded in a specific contract, and in the absence of the same, applicable laws related to the same will be required to be taken into consideration. Now, pause the video here, you can rewind it a little, read the passage again at your own pace, and cull out the important points given under the passage. So, if you have not seen the first lecture, then kindly, the link is there in the description. There I have told you how to how should you go about attempting questions, what should be your exercise. So whenever you see a passage, you need to call out the important inferences or important legal principles, important facts, etc. given under the passage to you. So now do this exercise and then let's compare them to the ones which I had found. So the important points given under the passage are that firstly, the pandemic and lockdown has caused delays in the performance of contracts. Secondly, the force majeure clauses covers acts of God and other extraordinary situations like wars, etc. Third, the courts have interpreted force majeure as an event that can neither be anticipated nor controlled by either of the contracting parties. Fourth, force majeure applies to ongoing contractual arrangements. Next, MAC applies to material adverse change, applies to allocation of risk in transactions before their completion. Next, pandemic and lockdown is covered by force majeure. Next, impact of clause can vary depending on the contractual terms. Then force majeure and MAC act as an exception to a breach of contract. The effect of an force majeure clause will depend on how the clause is worded. And lastly, in the absence of a force majeure clause, the applicable law will have to be seen. Now these are the important points which we could pull out from this passage. Let's move on to the questions based on this passage. Now, based on the author's argument in the passage above, which of the following is correct? A. Force majeure clauses generally have a uniform impact on the performance of contracts in all cases. B. Impact on the performance of contracts by way of usage of force majeure clause is dependent upon the way such clauses have been constructed in a particular contract. C. Force majeure and material adverse change clauses have similar impact on performance of contracts. Or option D, all of the above. Now if you have read the passage, you have seen the important points. The correct option is option B, as the second last point of the important points which we have pulled out told us. The author had explicitly said that different wordings of force majeure clauses will lead to different effects on the contract. So in some force majeure clauses he told us that the if any event happens, then the contract is terminated. In other clauses it is said that only the performance is suspended for a certain period. So clearly only option B fits. The other three options are not relevant, as first one tells you that a force majeure applies uniformly, which is not what the author told us, and even the third option is not correct, as author had clearly said that force majeure is very different from material adverse change. Okay, hence option B is the correct option. The next question, so imagine there is a domestic commercial contract for supply of certain goods for certain price between A and B. However, in pursuance of the same, both A and B forget to negotiate and agree on the terms of a force majeure event, and the contractual document does not contain the force majeure clause. In such a situation, what would be the fate of a contract in the event like that of COVID-19? Option A, the parties did not negotiate on the force majeure clause. Either of them cannot take an exception to the breach of contract. B, the parties can invoke material adverse change. C, in absence of such clauses, courts may resort to the applicable law, that is Indian Contract Act, to give relief to the parties. Or option D, none of the above. Now again the important points clearly tell us the answer. The correct answer is option C, as the last point in the last para of the passage And the last point which we have culled out, it clearly said in absence of a force majeure clause, the courts have to look at the applicable law. The applicable law is the Indian Contract Act. Thus, only option C is viable. As option A and option B are, for example, option B. So, material adverse change clause was not even talked about in the question at all. Correct. So, only option C is the correct option. So, next question. In the same fact situation as mentioned above, with a modification that there is a force majeure clause in contract between A and B. Let us suppose that B, who was supposed to supply goods to A on certain date and time, faced issues in relation to procurement of goods due to a mill strike and also because of a rise in prices of goods. In this case, can B claim the suspension of performance of contract on the basis of a force majeure clause? The options are yes, B can, depending upon the way the force majeure clause is worded. B, such situation cannot be covered under force majeure as it is just a case of disappointed expectations, and hence B cannot invoke the clause as it is merely a case of commercial hardship. C, B can invoke the force majeure clause as the clause is too broad to cover such situations. Or option D, none of the above. Now, in the passage, the author had told us what types of situation the force majeure clause covers. He said that they will cover acts of God, they will cover natural disasters, etc., etc. The factual situation is telling you something that is actually a commercial hardship. Thus, the correct option is option B. So, this was even covered in the point 2 of our important point. That is the force majeure clause is only applicable in very different circumstances than the ones given in the question to us. Correct. Hence, option B will be the correct option. Next question. Typically, the material adverse change provision in an agreement contemplates events which, if they occur or are likely to occur, would have a material adverse change or effect on the assets, business, property, liabilities, financial condition, results, or operation of target, or that it affects the ability of the transacting parties to consummate the transaction, or the validity or enforceability of the transacting parties to its rights and remedies under the transaction document. Now, which of the following sample clauses in a contract resembles an MAE clause? A. In the event either party is unable to perform its obligations under the terms of this agreement due to act of God, strikes, equipment of transmission failure, or damage reasonably beyond its control, such party should not be liable for damages resulting from such failure to perform. Option B. Except with respect to payment obligations under this agreement, no party shall be liable for, nor such party shall be considered in breach of this agreement to any failure to perform its obligations under this agreement as a result of a cause beyond its control, including earthquake, labor problem, unavailability of supplies. Option C, both of the above mentioned clauses, or option D, none of the above. Now, if you recall the passage, one important thing that it had told us was a material adverse change clause deals with an allocation of risk. Now, in both clause A and B, there is nothing which is dealing with an allocation of risk to one party. So, the correct option is option D. Both these clauses can be said to be an illustration of a force majeure clause, but since they nowhere are talking about any allocation of risk, that is why they cannot be something which comes under material adverse change. So, this again, option D is the correct option. So yeah, that is the end of this lecture. Thank you. Uh, we will be coming out with a lot more content on the other sections of CLAT as well, including reading comprehension, etc., etc. So in case you found this video to be helpful, kindly like the video and subscribe to our channel, as it will help us spread the word. So in our next lecture, I will be taking you through the law of crimes, and best of luck and see you then.